Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Today we are going to study chapter 14 part 2. Today's topic is the reforms introduced by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto introduced a number of reforms: industrial reforms, agriculture reforms, education reforms, health and social reforms, administrative reforms and constitutional reforms. Number one, industrial reforms. As Bhutto contested in the elections on the manifesto of shelter, clothing and food, he believed that by providing jobs to the people would be able to buy the shelter and the clothing for themselves. For this purpose, what he did, he nationalized 70 industrial units, and the purpose was to provide the jobs to the people. Although these reforms look very good, because when the people would have the jobs, they would easily buy all those things what they required in their life. But really it happened, there were some problems in these reforms. For example, the Pakistan's education system at that time was not producing the manager type people required to handle all those keys posts in these industries. Number two, there was a lack of coordination at federal level. I mean, the decisions taken by were not coordinated by the different departments, so the results were not coming. And the third reason why these industrial reforms were not fruitful was that at that time the world was passing from economic recession, so there were no orders from the world market. The private industries or the companies were already closed, and there was a little business that these nationalized industries could get from the foreign. Number two, agriculture reforms. Like Ayub Khan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto also introduced the agriculture reforms. For example, he changed the ceiling limitation, the land limitation for the landlords. For example, Ayub Khan made it clear that the 500 acres of irrigated land could be kept by the landlords, but Zulfikar Ali Bhutto made it 250 acres. And in the same way, unirrigated land, which limit was 1000 acres, but now Zulfikar Ali Bhutto changed it to 500 acres. Besides that, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto made it sure that the landlords could not remove all those the tenants, those who are working on their farms, and the land which was taken from these landlords should be first distributed among those tenants, those who are working over there. But again, these reforms are also just like a paperwork. For example, the reason was very simple. Those agencies appointed by the government were easily bribed by the landlords, and they were the powerful people. Some of the landlords transformed, they just leased their lands to their relatives and later on taken it back. And some of the lands had incomplete record. So we can say that the agriculture reforms were also not fruitful. Number three, education reforms. Bhutto wanted that the literacy rate of Pakistan should be increased. When Bhutto came into power, literacy rate was 25%, and what he believed that he should increase this rate. For this purpose, he wanted that the new curriculum should be introduced in the schools, which should meet Pakistan's educational, Pakistan's economic and social needs at that time. But again, like the other two reforms, the education reforms were also not fruitful. The reason was that the budget which was allocated for the educational sector was not sufficient, and number two, there were not trained people required for the key post, and the Bhutto was unable to see the positive aspects, the positive things what he believed from this education. And that was the reason that by the end of his rule, these reforms could not even increase the single percent of the literacy rate. Number three, health and social reforms. Bhutto believed that the health was one of his key point or the key focus. What he did, he introduced the rural health center in the rural areas. For 60,000 people, he built up a rural health center for the treatment of the people, where doctor was appointed, while in urban areas there was basic health units, which was one basic health unit was for the 20,000 people. Besides that, he banned the name of the selling of the medicine on the brand name, because this practice was common in the West, and by adopting this practice in Pakistan, dramatically decreased the prices of the medicine. but there was some negative aspect of this reform. For example, many of the pharmacist companies closed their business because they believed that there was a little profit in making these medicines. So rightly we can say that the health and these reforms were also not fruitful. Number 5, administrative reforms. But to believe that the civil service, the civil servants which were present at that time were corrupt and not efficient. For this purpose, he reorganized the civil service rules. Besides that, he also made that any person who is working in the government sector could join this civil service easily. Although he claimed that these reforms would increase the efficiency of this sector, but his opponents believed that he did all these things to reward his followers. Number last, the constitutional reforms. The constitutional reforms were one of the most important reforms in the form of the 1973 constitution. In my previous lesson, I have already explained the 1973 constitution. For example, he introduced that there would be bicameral legislation, there would be National Assembly, there would be Senate, fine, and the National Assembly would be elected for the 5 years. The Prime Minister and the President must be Muslim and should be over 40. Besides that, all basic human rights were granted, and the most important decision that taken by the Bhutto at that time and his cabinet was declaring the Ahmadis as a non-Muslim. Fine. So this is our today's lesson. Just review that industrial reforms, the reforms introduced by Bhutto in order to increase the industrial output. Beside that, the control the prices of the goods, and the inflation rate in Pakistan. For example, the inflation rate fell from 25% to 6%. And beside that, the Bhutto was intended to break the hold of the 22 families who control over 80% of the industries and more than 90% of the banks. Number 2, the agriculture reforms. He wanted to increase the agricultural output of Pakistan, and beside that, for this purpose, he definitely introduced the land reforms. He changed the limitation of the ceiling of the land held by the landlords. Number 3, education reforms. He wanted to increase the literacy rate, but unluckily or unfortunately, this rate was not increased even 1% with the reforms introduced. The health and social reforms were there. He introduced the rural health center and the urban health centers. Beside that, he banned the using of the medicine on the name of the brand name, and he also bound the doctors after completing their medical education that for 1 year they would have to work. They were bound to work in the area appointed by the government of Pakistan. Besides that, he also introduced the policy of merit for taking admissions in the medical colleges and the nursing schools. Administrative reforms, I have told you that he wanted that a civil and efficient civil service working for the service of the people of Pakistan, and constitutional reforms were introduced in the form of the 1973 constitution. Thank you.